Imagine a future where the global chessboard is completely reshuffled, alliances shift dramatically, and even the course of ongoing wars is decided not just on the battlefield, but maybe in boardrooms and through, well, economic pressure.
Yeah, it's a complex picture.
And you're about to get a unique shortcut to understanding the incredibly complex dynamics unfolding in the Ukraine war and the surprising, often disruptive influence of international trade policies, particularly, it seems, from Washington.
That's right. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the various endgame scenarios for the Ukraine war. We'll be focusing on Europe's evolving path towards what people are calling strategic autonomy.
Strategic autonomy, right.
And then, crucially, the significant and often unexpected role of U.S. tariff policies and, diplomatic approaches under the current administration.
Okay, so our mission today is really to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from recent analyses, expert reports, news coverage, all that stuff. We want to help you quickly grasp the multifaceted challenges and the potential paths forward, kind of connecting the dots on this global chessboard in a way that hopefully informs and engages you.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
So let's maybe kick things off by setting the board. The shifting landscape of the Ukraine war. When we look at Ukraine's current military reality, it seems their armed forces, the AFU, are crucially dependent on Western allies. What does that dependency truly look like on the ground?
Well, it's fundamental, really. The AFU remains critically reliant on its Western partners, not just for sophisticated weaponry, but for specific high-value assets.
Okay, like what specifically?
We're talking about things like long-range precision missiles, the interceptors they need for their air defense systems, and even the complex maintenance, the upkeep of all this advanced equipment.
I mean, it's not just getting the gear, it's keeping it running.
Exactly. And beyond the hardware, their logistical backbone, including vital communication systems like SpaceX's Starlink, also hinges on this Western support. It's a comprehensive reliance.
And if that reliance were to falter, I mean, sources paint a pretty stark picture of what a potential defeat could mean for Ukraine. It's not just about losing territory, is it?
No, far from it. The potential outcomes are, severe. They paint a grim future where Ukraine could be forced to accept pretty much all of Russia's demands.
All of them.
Well, the scenario isn't just about military loss. It's just the imposition of a pro-Russian president, which leads to complete political subjugation, basically. Ukraine losing its independent decision-making power.
Total loss of sovereignty, essentially.
Pretty much. The AFU would likely be demilitarized. Russian troops could be permanently stationed in designated buffer oblasts.
Buffer zones, okay.
And beyond that, the reports suggest large-scale purges within the state apparatus and a significant erosion of Ukrainian identity and statehood. What this really means is fundamentally altering who holds power and influence around the Black Sea. It could make Ukraine almost a modern-day satellite state.
That's a sobering thought. And of course, a crucial piece on this chessboard is U.S. support, which, well, it's seen some notable shifts, hasn't it?
It certainly has.
We've seen instances where aid deliveries were paused and then, perhaps surprisingly, reversed. It creates a lot of uncertainty. How has the current administration approached this dynamic, especially with, domestic criticisms in mind?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the administration seems to have aimed to address those domestic concerns about the cost of aid. President Trump recently announced billions of dollars worth of U.S. weapons for Ukraine.
Right, Patriots and things like that.
Exactly, including Patriot air defense missiles. But with the expectation that NATO allies would primarily cover the costs.
So shifting the financial burden.
Sort of, yeah. This approach prioritizes American resources while aiming to ensure allies contribute their share. It's framed as a more fiscally responsible use of U.S. defense aid, you see.
A different kind of burden sharing. But what's truly striking, I think, is how the administration, upon taking office in January 2025, significantly increased uncertainty by pursuing direct bilateral negotiations with Moscow.
Yes, that was a major shift.
And this approach often sidestepped both the European Union and Ukraine itself, right? Pushing Kiev quite hard for agreements that would, strongly favor Russia.
That's what the reports indicate. Even to the point of acknowledging already occupied Ukrainian territory and discussing the lifting of sanctions.
Is there a perception that this move sort of sacrifices long-term alliances for perceived short-term gains?
Well, the sources certainly highlight the friction it caused. There were reports, for instance, of demands for U.S. strategic rights to Ukraine's mineral reserves in return for support.
Really? Mineral rights.
apparently, which clearly strained relations with Ukrainian President Zelensky and even led reportedly to a temporary suspension of military aid and intelligence sharing.
Wow. Okay.
Furthermore, the U.S. has been, let's say, notably reluctant to offer Ukraine the kind of comprehensive security guarantees that Kyiv sees as a top priority.
Like NATO membership, for example.
Exactly. The U.S. Defense Secretary has stated that NATO membership for Ukraine isn't seen as a realistic outcome for a negotiated settlement, and also that the U.S. wouldn't deploy troops as peacekeepers.
So no boots on the ground as peacekeepers either.
Correct. It underscores a shift towards perhaps a more pragmatic, and some might argue, self-interested foreign policy, where direct negotiation and economic leverage seem to take precedence over maybe traditional alliances.
That sense of a more, let's call it pragmatic, self-interested U.S. foreign policy isn't just limited to military aid, though. It extends powerfully into economic policy.
Absolutely.
And that's where President Trump's tariff strategy comes into play, setting the stage for potentially major global repercussions. This is where we really see that peace through strength economic approach in action.
Right, using tariffs as a tool to achieve foreign policy goals, specifically aimed apparently at ending the Ukraine war.
So how does that work in practice?
Well, the administration has detailed a threat to impose very severe tariffs on Russia if a peace agreement isn't reached within 50 days.
50 days. That's a tight deadline.
Very tight. And what's particularly noteworthy and a significant escalation is this concept of secondary tariffs.
Secondary tariffs. What are those?
These would impact third-party countries if they continue purchasing Russian oil. Think India, which sourced, 35% of its crude imports from Russia in 2024.
Okay.
China at 19%. Turkey, which got a huge 58% of its refined petroleum imports from Russia in 2023.
So hitting Russia's customers.
Precisely. Even European countries buying Russian uranium could face these tariffs potentially at a rate of 100%.
100%. Wow.
Yeah. The message is pretty clear. Support Russian energy trade, and you'll pay a heavy price with the U.S.
That naturally leads me to wonder about the legal basis for such a strategy. I mean, isn't Congress usually in charge of tariffs?
Typically, yes. It's actually a groundbreaking move legally. While the U.S. Constitution does delegate tariff power to Congress, President Trump has used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, for the very first time to impose these kinds of tariffs. He's citing national emergencies related to issues like fentanyl smuggling, irregular migration, the national trade deficit.
So using emergency powers for trade policy.
Exactly. It's a truly unprecedented legal maneuver, basically declaring an economic state of emergency to unilaterally impose trade policy. It dramatically centralizes power away from Congress in this area.
And we saw some of this with the Liberation Day tariffs, too.
We did. A universal 10% on all imports initially, with even higher country-specific tariffs slapped on 57 trading partners. That initially caused a stock market crash and subsequent delays, showing just how potent and maybe disruptive such a unilateral approach can be perceived by the markets.
It sounds like a truly high-stakes game of economic poker. How have other major global players reacted to this aggressive tariff strategy?
Well, unsurprisingly, it's drawn varied international reactions. Russia publicly dismissed the threats as unacceptable ultimatums.
Standard rhetoric? Maybe.
Perhaps. Although some observers think Russia might be more concerned privately than it lets on, especially given the reliance on those oil revenues.
Sure, that makes sense. What about others? China?
Major trading partners like China quickly retaliated with their own tariffs. For example, 15% on coals, 10% on oil and agricultural machines. They also used non-tariff barriers and even seemed to strengthen trade ties with South Korea and Japan, kind of signaling a shift in their own trade priorities away from the U.S.
Hedging their bets, maybe?
Could be. And Canada, Mexico, the EU, they also considered or implemented reciprocal tariffs. So you see a clear global pushback developing.
Okay, so international friction.
Yeah.
What about the economic impact back home in the U.S.? Did the tariffs achieve their stated goals?
Well, the sources report mixed results. The tariffs did raise significant revenue, about $108 billion net over 9 months.
That's a lot of money.
It is. But the reports also suggest the burden fell primarily on U.S. consumers and businesses through higher prices, and it likely contributed to a slowdown in global economic growth.
So a domestic cost.
Yes. And politically, this strategy also faced challenges. There was congressional frustration, concerns about the U.S.'s standing in global security circles. It's a clear example of using economic leverage to pursue national interests. But it definitely comes with considerable friction, both at home and abroad.
Which brings us, I suppose, to Europe's own strategic trajectory. While the U.S. shifts its approach, Europe seems to be making tangible progress toward what they call strategic autonomy. Can you unpack that term a bit? What does strategic autonomy really mean for Europe?
Sure. When we talk about Europe's strategic autonomy, what we're really getting at is their push to become more self-reliant militarily, economically, so they're less dependent, on the U.S. or any single external power for their big security decisions.
And they're putting real money behind that goal, aren't they? It sounds like more than just talk this time.
It does seem that way. Germany, for instance, finally met NATO's 2% defense spending target.
That was a long time coming.
Indeed. And they've committed substantial long-term aid to Ukraine over EUR 60 billion since 2022. Plus, there are significant joint procurement schemes, like that program, to deliver 1 million artillery shells.
The million shells, right.
And quite ambitious plans for joint EU debt to finance weapons procurement, potentially up to EUR 800 billion, with a large chunk, EUR 158 billion, specifically earmarked for European firms. These are significant investments aimed at building up European capacity.
So it's not just about sending aid elsewhere, but actively stimulating Europe's own defense industrial base.
Exactly.
I can see how these efforts could have positive ripple effects, maybe especially for economies in Central, Southeastern, and Eastern Europe, as countries like Germany diversify their manufacturing, maybe away from just automotive towards more defense-related industries.
That's the idea, building a more robust, truly European defense sector.
But it can't be all smooth sailing, surely.
No, precisely. This path isn't without its challenges. Defense integration remains pretty uneven across the continent, and member states still have varying perceptions of the threats they face, which can definitely complicate unified action.
Different priorities.
Different priorities, different histories, and there's still a continued, albeit maybe lessening, reliance on U.S. backing for certain key capabilities like high-end intelligence or strategic airlift.
And internal politics must play a role, too.
Oh, absolutely. Internally, there are notable obstacles. You have countries like Hungary, Slovakia, sometimes Czechia, potentially exercising veto power over aid packages or sanctions. And there's the lingering influence of populist forces that might be more sensitive to, well, the Kremlin's viewpoint.
Despite the war.
Despite the war. Yet what's truly interesting is that these same states often have significant material incentives, think lucrative EU-funded contracts for weapons production within their borders, to actually align with Europe's growing defense industrial complex. So it creates this fascinating internal push and pull dynamic.
A real balancing act. So wrapping this all up, what does all this mean for you, the listener? We've seen how the path to peace, or at least stability in Ukraine, is just fraught with these complex dependencies and rapidly shifting diplomatic strategies, heavily influenced by the U.S. approach, both with military aid and this aggressive economic pressure through tariffs.
And at the same time, Europe is trying to chart its own course towards greater defense autonomy, navigating all these intricate internal and external pressures we've discussed.
So the final provocative thought for you to mull over might be this. As these global powers navigate these incredibly complex negotiations, these high-stakes economic maneuvers, what will ultimately be the true cost of peace? And perhaps more importantly, who will end up bearing its heaviest burden? It's a question that continues to echo across this shifting global trade chessboard.